Hey dudes, so I'm going to be starting a series on morphology. Today is day one. We will be focusing on the history of the English language because it's important for us to know where English came from before we start thinking about word parts and their origins. Before we start learning, let's do a quick overview of what morphology is and why it's important. Very simply put, morphology is the study of words. You use morphology to figure out what words mean and where they came from. This is important because it can help us figure out the meanings of words, and it will help us become better readers who are able to understand more of what we read. With morphology, I can put any text in front of you, and you're going to be able to read it because you know word parts. Those are also called morphemes, which we'll talk about next time. The very beginnings of English started with people that we call the Indo-Europeans. They were a group of people who lived over 7,000 years ago. They are the beginnings of a lot of languages, which we're about to see, so we can think of them as the grandpas of the English language. So now, I know you can't read anything on this slide, and you don't have to remember anything on this slide, but I'm just showing you that the Indo-Europeans are the grandfathers of a lot of languages. So they're at the very top of this basically family tree, and every other language that came from them follows down the flowchart. The arrow is pointing to English. So this is just a closer look at the bottom of the chart so you can see English right here. So we can think of the development of English as a timeline. So at the beginning of our timeline, about 7,000 years ago, are the Indo-Europeans. So the next people on our timeline are the Greeks. Something that's very important to remember as we go along the presentation is that these people were conquering each other, and that is how they came to influence the language spoken. So when the Greeks took control, their language became the most commonly used language. So you could think of the Greek civilization as the first intellectual civilization. This is why most of the words with Greek origin in English are words that are used in politics, medicine, and science. So the Greeks are also the beginning of the alphabet. You can see when you look at the Greek alphabet that a lot of the Greek letters look familiar. So we're going to go ahead and add the Greeks to our timeline. So the next group of people that influenced the English language, and really the way that we live today, are the Romans. They spoke a language called Latin. So when we talk about the word parts that came from the Romans, we're going to call them Latin bases. So they conquered the Greeks in 146 BC. So the Romans are the true basis in the beginning of the English language, especially when we think about how we read and write. So for example, they are the reason we read from left to right. They also gave us many of the words that we still use today in the military, in sports, and in religion. So this is the Roman alphabet. You can see that it's starting to look even more familiar to the one that we have today. So we're going to add the Romans to our timeline. If you're looking at the years and thinking, Miss Deal, that looks crazy, you made a mistake, why are they going backwards? You can thank the Romans for that too. So they use the abbreviations BC to mean before Christ and AD to mean Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord in Latin. Basically, the Romans used the birth of Jesus as a way to separate different eras of time. So BC gets shorter and shorter, or smaller and smaller, because the years go shorter and shorter before the birth of Christ, and then they grow again after the birth of Christ. So the next group of people who influenced and truly created the English language are the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. You can think of it like this. Angles are from England, and England is where the English language was born. So the Angles were farming people. They didn't have a lot of time. They were working. They used mostly short and functional words to communicate. Many of the English words that we have today of Anglo-Saxon origin are words that deal with family, farming, and body parts. So basically all the words you needed to be able to talk to each other quickly. So like my arm hurts. I need to be able to say that quickly. So that's why arm is an Anglo-Saxon word. So even English itself went through phases. So we started with Old English, then moved to Middle English, then early modern English, and finally the English that we speak today. If any of these people who spoke any of these languages tried to communicate with each other, they wouldn't be able to do it. So we're going to add the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes to our timeline, and you'll notice that it has an AD, so this is when the years start to get bigger again. So the last group of people we're going to talk about are the French. Now, the Anglo-Saxons definitely still spoke English when the French invaded, but they are important to remember because they did influence our language. Vocabulary. The French added a lot of vocabulary words to English. This is the most important thing you need to know about the French influence on English. We're not going to learn French bases, but it is important to know that a lot of our English words come from French. So let's add them to our timeline. So finally, the last thing we're going to learn about is the Great Vowel Shift. I had a lot of fun with that, guys. I did it like that because the Great Vowel Shift is so important. It is what caused many letters to become silent and for some words to have different ways that we pronounce them. So the Great Vowel Shift really refers to vowels, and the vowels change the way that people pronounce them. So just to be clear, the way that people speak changes every couple hundred years. So the way that we speak today is probably going to be different from the way that we speak in 2220. But this particular one is important to remember because it was happening at the same time as the invention of the printing press. So the reason this is so important is because the printing press made it so that spelling had to be standardized or made the same. Printers couldn't afford to change the spelling of words in books that they had already printed. So even if a letter became silent or the way that people pronounced words became different, the spelling stayed the same. So that's why we have to learn all the different ways that you can read a word, because even if the way that we pronounce them changes, their spelling is not going to change, and it hasn't changed since 1450. And we're in 2020 now. So just think about that pronunciation changes every 200 years, and 1450 is almost 600 years ago. So spelling, or excuse me, not spelling, that's wrong, pronunciation has changed approximately 3 times, and spelling has not changed at all. So we're going to add the Great Vowel Shift and the printing press to our timeline. Okay, in our next video, we're going to focus on Anglo-Saxon base words. These are going to be short words that you probably know and that you know how to spell and read. So this is going to be a great way for us to start thinking about morphology and how we can think about what words mean. I miss you guys. I wish you were in school. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and safe. And I can't wait to see you back when we get back to school.